The first sound he heard was not his own breath, nor the rustle of his armor, nor even the distant pulse of a dying star. It was chanting. A low, thunderous litany rolling like stone dragged over bone, rising from a cathedral older than continents. Slade Wilson felt the ground beneath him tremble as the air thickened with dust and incense, each breath tasting of ash and sanctity. His damaged eye throbbed as if the very atmosphere pressed against his skull, and for an instant he wondered if some old mission had finally broken his mind. But then the world sharpened, too real to be hallucination, too vast to be any battlefield he knew. Towering statues of forgotten heroes watched him from the shadows, their cracked visages lit by the glow of braziers burning promethium blue. A golden throne rose at the far end of the hall, its surface marked by centuries of prayer and war. And Slade realized with the slow certainty of a man who had seen too much death to ever deny the truth, that he had crossed into a universe where war was not an event, but the air itself. A realm where even the silence felt weaponized. A place built for warriors, devoured by gods, and ruled by a name spoken only in terror and reverence. This was not just another world. This was the Imperium of man, and Deathstroke had stepped into its eternal war. If you're drawn into this strange collision of universes, if you want to see what happens when the deadliest assassin of one world is thrown into the most brutal empire in the galaxy, then stay with us. Like the vid scribes of ancient Terra, your support helps keep these chronicles alive. Light the beacon, lend us your voice, and let's descend together into the Grimdark. The first thing Slade Wilson registered was weight. An immense crushing pressure that settled over his armor like an invisible hand straining to force him into the stone beneath his boots. For a heartbeat, he couldn't tell if he was standing or sinking. The air felt denser than anything he'd breathed before, thick with ash, incense, and an old metallic tang that clung to the back of his throat. When he finally pulled in a steady breath, it carried the faint taste of promethium, as though the very atmosphere had been burned and reheated 1,000 times. Something in him, that old soldier's instinct, whispered that this place was not merely ancient, it was wounded. The hall around him was a cathedral forged from mountains. Towering pillars stretched upward until they disappeared into darkness, their surfaces etched with symbols Slade did not recognize. Sigils that seemed carved by hands desperate to leave behind warnings rather than blessings. Statues of armored giants lined the walls, each one standing in silent vigil with weapons larger than Slade's entire body. Dust drifted in slow, patient spirals caught in the faint glow of braziers burning a strange blue flame. Every flame felt unnatural, as if starfire had been coaxed into a cage. Slade scanned everything, every angle, every shadow, letting his mind assemble the space the way a sniper assembles a firing solution. Entry points, elevated perches, blind corners. The habit never left him. He moved one step and the sound rolled through the hall like a hammer blow, echoing far longer than any footstep should. The architecture amplified sound in a way designed for intimidation or ceremony, not stealth. Slade's good eye narrowed. He didn't know where he was, but he knew immediately that this was not a place made by any civilization he recognized. There was no symmetry of modern structures, no soft edges, no signs of tradition for comfort. Everything here was engineered to overwhelm, designed to remind lesser beings of their insignificance. A faint tremor pulsed through the floor. Slade froze. He felt it before he heard it, the slow, deliberate rhythm of something titanic approaching. Not footsteps, not exactly. More like armor plates interlocking with each movement, heavy enough that the impact traveled through the stone into his bones. He moved into a defensive stance without thinking, muscle memory overriding everything else. His eye swept to the nearest darkened archway. Too narrow for retreat. He scanned the pillars. Climbing was possible, but he'd be exposed the moment he ascended. A mercenary does not fear death, but he does not embrace stupidity. A new sound joined the tremor, a low, almost subsonic hum. It resonated in the stone and braided into the air, vibrating against the scars around his missing eye. Instinct warned him that the thing approaching was not a soldier. Soldiers announced their presence. This presence was a proclamation, something that believed itself an apex. Slade drew his blade slowly, the metal whispering as it cleared its sheath. The echo was swallowed by the cathedral before it had room to breathe. He tightened his grip. Then he saw it. Light, golden and radiant, spilled across the far arch like sunrise breaking over a dead world. From the glow stepped a figure that made every instinct Slade possessed flare into warning. The armor alone commanded fear, plate forged from auramite, sculpted into the shape of an empire's myth. The figure stood taller than any human, broad enough to block the entire archway, each step landing with a weight that made dust drift from the ceiling in fine streams. Flames from the braziers bent toward him as if pulled by gravity. Slade had fought metahumans, gods, monsters born in laboratories, and creatures that should never have existed. None of them radiated what this warrior did. Inevitability. The custodian guard did not speak immediately. He approached with a slow certainty, visor reflecting Slade's form in twin displays of polished gold. When he finally stopped a few meters away, the silence between them felt like the pause before a verdict is delivered. The custodian's spear glowed faintly along its edge, the hum deeper here, resonating like a caged thunderstorm. "You are an anomaly," the custodian said, voice echoing as though carried across centuries. It wasn't a question. It was a sentence. Slade didn't move. "I'm a soldier," he said. "Nothing more." The custodian tilted his helmet slightly as though studying a strange insect. "You bear no mark of the Imperium, no gene seed, no recognized signature, and yet you are here." "Where is here exactly?" Slade asked, even though the answer already gnawed at the edge of his mind. The custodian took one step forward. Slade's muscles tightened automatically. "You stand in the sanctum of the Oathed Sun," the warrior said. "A place no outsider has seen and lived." Slade exhaled slowly. "Lucky day for both of us, then." The custodian did not react. Emotion, if it existed beneath the helm, remained sealed. Only the spear shifted, its tip lowering by a fraction, enough to signify that the next seconds would determine whether Slade died or entered a fate worse than death. Slade evaluated the weapon. He could disarm most soldiers before they blinked, close the distance, and kill with precision. But the man before him was not simply trained. He was engineered. Perfect stance, zero wasted motion, every breath measured. A living weapon built for war so vast Slade could not yet comprehend it. The custodian's next words were not loud, yet they seemed to compress the air. "Do not resist." Slade smiled beneath his mask, a small, grim expression that never reached his eye. "That's not really my specialty." The custodian moved then, faster than something that size should ever move. Slade barely had time to shift his weight before a shockwave rolled across the floor as the custodian's spear intercept struck the stone where Slade had stood. He dove to the side, rolling behind a fallen pillar. The impact tremor rattled his bones. The custodian straightened slowly, unfazed. "Your reflexes exceed unaugmented human norms," he observed, voice neutral. "That confirms the record." "What record?" Slade growled. "Your arrival breached several detection augers. The lexiconum believes you came through a tear, a wound in reality." Slade rose from behind the pillar, blade in hand. "I don't belong here," he said, "but I'm not dying here either." The custodian aimed his spear, and its edge hummed brighter. We will see. The battle was not a battle, it was a statement. Slade struck with speed honed by decades of war, his blade arcing toward joints in the armor. Sparks leapt where metal met auramite, beautiful, useless sparks. The custodian countered with controlled strength that could have bisected a tank hull. Slade dodged, rolled, cut at tendons that did not exist in a body engineered beyond humanity. Each clash sent pain across his arms, but he didn't stop. He never stopped. But even Slade Wilson could not defy inevitability forever. The custodian caught him by the wrist with a grip that felt like a hydraulic clamp. Slade tried to twist free, only for the spear's haft to slam into his sternum and drive the air from his lungs. He crashed against the pillar, vision swimming. Before he could rise, the spear's energized edge hovered inches from his throat. The custodian's voice fell to a rumble. The Emperor wills that you be taken alive. You will comply. Slade spat blood onto the floor and glared upward. You should have opened with that. Darkness surged in from the edges of his vision as the custodian activated a containment field. Slade's last conscious thought was simple, cold, and precise. Learn, adapt, survive. Because whatever this world was, whatever empire he had stumbled into, one truth remained unshaken in Slade Wilson's mind. Everything can be killed. And something here wanted to test that. Slade regained consciousness to the grinding thrum of engines older than some civilizations. The scent hit him next, a harsh mixture of burnt ozone, machine oil, and something metallic that clung to the back of his tongue. When he opened his eye, the world resolved into a dim corridor carved from steel and stone, lit by flickering lumen strips that cast long shadows across the floor. His wrists were bound by grav shackles that hummed with low, oppressive energy. Every movement felt heavy, like wading through water thickened with ash. 2 custodians escorted him, one ahead and one behind. Their footsteps were rhythmic and absolute, like war drums given form. Their golden armor made the corridor seem smaller, forcing Slade to measure every breath, every angle, every potential weakness. The binds prevented him from moving faster than a slow walk, but they didn't stop his mind from dissecting the environment with clinical precision. He noted the low drone of the deck plating beneath his boots. This was a transport, massive and reinforced. Not a simple shuttle, something larger designed for troop movement or prisoner handling. The walls bore the faint imprint of an Imperial Aquila, its wings half eroded by time and war. Even in decay, it radiated purpose. A servitor passed by, limbs clicking as augmetic pistons shifted beneath pallid flesh. Its vox grill sputtered a guttural chant as its photolenses briefly flickered toward Slade. Behind it, 2 Skitarii patrols marched with perfect synchronization, their red hoods swaying gently with each step. Their rifles were slung across their chests, each weapon marked with cryptic sigils that seemed half machine, half religion. Slade kept his face composed, but inside his thoughts flickered like sharpened wires. These soldiers, they weren't just disciplined, they were indoctrinated to a degree that bordered on theological. The custodians walking beside him weren't merely warriors, they were symbols, guardians of a scale he had never confronted. His mind cataloged every detail, how their armor flexed, how their weapons were held, how they shifted their weight. He couldn't overpower them, not yet, but he could learn. He always learned. The corridor ended at a towering adamantium gate. It parted with a grinding sigh, revealing a vast chamber that felt more like the inside of a cathedral than any military facility. Blue flame burned in massive braziers suspended by chains. Incense hung in dense curtains, twisting through the air like slow smoke. The ground was covered with a mosaic depicting a giant figure surrounded by warriors. An image that felt half myth, half warning. The custodians guided Slade into the center of the chamber and halted. A cold sensation pressed against his spine, and he realized the shackles were tightening, adjusting to pin him upright. Then the chamber's far doors opened. A robed figure entered, draped in dark blue cloth trimmed with gold sigils. His eyes glowed faintly from the psychic hood framing his skull. He moved with the quiet certainty of someone who had spent years reading the minds of killers and zealots alike. Slade recognized arrogance in his stride, but also caution. The man radiated awareness like heat. "A lexiconum," the custodian announced. Slade lifted his chin slightly. "Mind reader?" he muttered. The lexiconum ignored the comment. He circled Slade slowly, examining him as if he were a relic recovered from a battlefield. "You do not belong to any pattern within our archives," he said. "Your physiology is anomalous. Your armor is unfamiliar. Your memories—" He paused, head turning just enough to let Slade know those glowing eyes were locked onto him. "Your mind is turbulent." "Occupational hazard," Slade replied. The lexicanum rested a hand atop Slade's forehead. The world detonated, not physically, psychically. A rush of pressure crashed into Slade's skull like a tidal wave of molten metal. It scraped through his memories with no subtlety whatsoever, dredging up years of violence, wounds, betrayals, victories, losses. He felt 1,000 images rip free, missions in jungles and deserts, ambushes under moonlight. The moment his eye was lost, the dozens, no hundreds of lives he'd taken. Pain folded into training, training folded into instinct, instinct coiled into purpose. Then something snapped. The lexicanum staggered backward, reeling as though struck. His psychic hood crackled with blue lightning. He clutched his temples, gasping. "What are you?" he whispered. Slade's voice was calm, almost bored. "Told you not to dig." The custodians did not react outwardly, but Slade sensed tension shift in the air like steel drawn in a quiet room. The lexicanum steadied himself, eyes trembling with something close to fear. "He is not a mutant," the psionic murmured. "Not a sanctioned psyker, but his mind is a battlefield. It resists. It attacks." Slade smiled beneath his mask. "You should see what I do when I'm actually trying." The custodian stepped forward. "Does he possess knowledge of the ruinous powers?" "No," the lexicanum hissed. "His violence is human, terribly human." Slade caught the faintest shift in the custodian's stance. It was approval, or perhaps relief, hard to tell. The lexicanum recovered enough to stand at full height again. "Then his presence here is either accident or design." Slade felt the shackle pressure tighten. "I'm not here by design," he said. "Trust me." The lexicanum leaned forward. "The warp does not trust, it consumes. If you came through its tides, you carry their echo." Slade said nothing. The echo wasn't metaphysical. It was simple. He'd survived things that should have killed him. That alone made him stand out here. A new presence entered the chamber, silent, cold, authoritative. Slade didn't turn. He felt it. One of the custodians shifted subtly, indicating someone of higher rank approached. A shadow stretched across the mosaic floor as another armored figure crossed the threshold, this one bearing a halberd adorned with ancient script. The custodians bowed their heads. "Tribune," one of them announced quietly. The tribune regarded Slade with an unreadable gaze, his helm reflecting the assassin's form like a warped mirror. "He has endured mind probing," he said. "He resists captivity, and he fights with the tenacity of a trained operative." The lexicanum nodded, still pale. "His thoughts are sharp, weaponized. I have never encountered a mind so disciplined." Slade said nothing. "Weapons don't speak unless needed." The Tribune stepped closer, halberd lowering just enough to show Slade that every motion was being judged. "You will be tested," he said, voice a slow, cold verdict. "The Imperium does not fear strength, but it eliminates what it cannot understand." Slade's eye narrowed. "Let me guess," he said. "You want me to fight something?" The Tribune did not confirm or deny. "If you survive," he said, "you may earn the right to exist within the Emperor's domain." Slade held that gaze without flinching. "What if I refuse?" "You won't." Slade's silence was agreement enough. The shackles released with a metallic snap, and Slade dropped to one knee, jolted by the sudden freedom. The Custodians didn't move. They watched him rise slowly, testing his balance, flexing his fingers. The Tribune pointed toward the chamber doors, which now glowed with warning lights. "The trial of the unclaimed awaits." Slade rolled his neck once, loosening the tension. "Trial, huh?" he muttered. "Good, I was getting bored." The Custodians ushered him forward, their steps echoing like the march of a Titan legion. Slade walked between them, calm, silent, already planning. Survive the trial, learn their limits, find the cracks in their armor. No matter how vast the Imperium was, no matter how ancient its warriors, no matter how impossible the odds. Everything bled, and Slade Wilson had made an entire life out of finding what warriors bleed from. The elevator that carried Slade down into the proving grounds moved with an unhurried, mechanical certainty, as if each meter descended was a ritualistic acknowledgement of the fate awaiting those below. The light inside was dim, flickering like a candle in a draft, casting shifting shadows across Slade's armor and the grim expressions of the Custodians flanking him. Neither spoke. Their silence said everything. This wasn't a test to measure skill. It was an evaluation of whether he deserved to exist in their world at all. When the elevator doors finally ground open, Slade stepped into a cavernous chamber carved into the bones of the fortress monastery. The first thing he noticed was the cold. Not the natural chill of deep stone, but a manufactured cold. Processed, recycled air made frigid by neglect and utilitarian design. The second thing he noticed was the smell. A mixture of sweat, oil, and iron. A smell he knew too well, the scent of war. Rows of metal cages lined the walls, each occupied by figures hunched in exhaustion or pacing like caged beasts. Guards from the Astra Militarum watched from elevated platforms, lasguns held across their chests, their expressions a mixture of fear and resignation. Some cages held deserters. Some held captured Xenos. A few held creatures Slade could not identify, hulking silhouettes with too many limbs or spines that scraped against the metal bars. But every occupant shared one thing. They were all waiting to die. Slade's boots clicked against the steel floor as the Custodians led him deeper into the chamber. Eyes turned to him, some curious, some mocking, some hollow from having seen too much already. A massive gate of reinforced ceramite loomed at the far end, its surface gouged with claw marks and weapon strikes. Above it, a battered hololithic display flickered weakly, showing a rotating aquila over the words. Trial of the unclaimed, purity through strife. The message wasn't meant for him, it was meant for them. Weapons materialized from the darkness, melee relics taken from fallen warriors, battered swords, axes, knives, crude Xenos blades. They were dropped unceremoniously at Slade's feet by a servitor whose augmetic limbs hissed with every movement. Slade crouched, picking through them with the discerning eye of someone who understood that the smallest advantage could shift the balance between life and death. He found a short blade with a jagged edge, its weight uneven, its balance imperfect. He spun it once in his hand. Familiar enough, functional enough, it would do. A loud buzz tore through the chamber and Slade's gaze flicked upward as the cage doors began to open. Prisoners stumbled forward, blinking against the light strobing across the arena floor. Some shouted roaring challenges into the void. Others simply walked, accepting whatever fate awaited them. One figure, towering and broad, snarled as he passed Slade. The creature was Xenos, green skin, jutting tusks, armor made from scavenged plating welded together. An orc, Slade realized, though he didn't know how he knew. Instinct, perhaps. The thing's gaze lingered on him, confused for a moment. "Tiny Yumi," the orc muttered. "Good for squishing." Slade didn't respond. He didn't need to. The orc moved on and Slade entered the arena. The proving ground was a circle of metal and stone surrounded by raised battlements where soldiers, servitors, and ranking clergy observed in cold silence. A haze drifted through the air, illuminated by harsh floodlights that made every flaw, every scar, every corpse-littered stain impossible to ignore. The floor was marked by old impacts and dried blood, a battlefield in miniature. The gate sealed shut behind him. A guttural klaxon blared once, then fell into silence. Slade took his stance. The first wave came not as a roar, but as a ripple. Several prisoners breaking from the pack, sprinting toward him with improvised weapons raised. Their movements were frantic, sloppy. Desperation made weak men bold. Slade stepped into the first strike, letting the jagged blade part skin and muscle cleanly. Blood sprayed, a hot mist that evaporated quickly in the cold air. He pivoted, ducked under a wide swing, and let his elbow crash into a jaw with bone-snapping force. Another came from behind. Slade's heel rolled in a pivot, his blade hooking under the attacker's wrist, twisting until the weapon clattered to the floor. He struck once, fast, ending it efficiently. This wasn't war. This was slaughter wearing war's clothing. The next wave brought more capable threats. An Imperial deserter armed with a shock baton crackling with energy. A bandaged convict whose arm had been replaced by a crude augmetic claw. Two mutants with elongated limbs moving in jerky, unsettling patterns. Slade adapted, slipping between attacks, using each enemy's momentum against them. He felt the arena watching, eyes narrowing, analyzing, cataloging every motion. The Custodians stood unmoving, golden statues wreathed in torch glow. But Slade sensed their judgment like a blade against the back of his neck. The deserter lunged. Slade met the baton with a strike that sent vibrations up his arm, then redirected the shaft, driving it into the mutant's ribcage. The shock coursed through the creature, dropping it instantly. Slade spun, kicked the baton free, and used the momentary disorientation to bury his blade in the deserter's thigh. The orc roared approval from the far side of the arena. Slade didn't break rhythm. He parried another strike, reversed his grip, and carved a shallow wound across an enemy's forearm. Not deep enough to kill, just enough to force a drop in guard. He followed with a brutal knee to the diaphragm and a twisting slash across the throat. Each move was calculated, economical, shaped by decades of brutal experience. He didn't waste breath, didn't waste thought. Violence in moments like this became clarity, but the arena was far from finished with him. The far gate thundered open with a force that shook dust from the rafters. A bestial howl echoed through the chamber, raw and primal. Slade turned slowly, blade held low, ready. The creature that emerged was enormous, muscles knotted under scarred skin, chains dragging behind it like broken shackles. Its eyes burned with feral rage, a failed experiment, a biological weapon left to rot. Whatever it had been, it was built to kill. Slade shifted his weight and inhaled once, letting the cold air tighten his focus. The creature charged, shaking the ground. Slade leapt aside, feeling the rush of air as claws tore into the floor where he'd stood a second earlier. He struck at its flank, blade biting into flesh, but the wound barely slowed it. The beast swung again, and Slade ducked under the massive arm, rolling between its legs and slashing at a tendon. This time the creature faltered, dropping to one knee with a furious bellow. Slade moved in, flipping the blade in his hand. He ended it fast. Silence washed over the arena. One by one, the overseers leaned forward. The Astra Militarum soldiers whispered among themselves. A servitor paused mid-task. Even the orc watched with what could only be described as respect. High above, behind a shielded viewing slat, a set of eyes observed Slade with interest. The custodians exchanged a brief glance. The tribune's voice echoed down. "Enough." Slade stood in the center of the arena, chest rising with controlled breaths, surrounded by bodies and steam rising from the cooling blood. He had passed the trial, but as the lights dimmed and the gates prepared to open once more, Slade felt something he had not felt in a long time: attention. Someone powerful had taken an interest in him. And in the Imperium of man, attention could be deadlier than any battlefield. The ascent felt nothing like the descent, where the elevator had once carried Slade down into the iron gut of the fortress monastery. This new passage rose with eerie calm, gliding upward without sound or vibration. The custodians surrounded him in a diamond formation, weapons held in ceremonial stillness. They did not speak. They did not need to. Every step they took radiated a solemnity that made the air feel hushed, as if the fortress itself were holding its breath. Slade felt the temperature shift as they rose, cold stone giving way to a strange, almost sacred warmth. The scent changed too. No more oil, blood, or rust. Instead, incense, faint but lingering like echoes of ancient rituals. The elevator then opened without fanfare, revealing a narrow walkway suspended above an abyss that seemed carved from darkness itself. Blue lumen globes drifted through the void like distant stars, illuminating a path that felt impossibly fragile. "This is a sanctum of restricted access," the lead custodian said softly. "Few tread here. Fewer still understand why." Slade stepped forward anyway. If fear existed in him, it had long ago been folded into discipline. They moved down the walkway, each step accompanied by the slow, resonant hum of unseen machinery. Slade glanced into the depths below. He couldn't see the bottom, only the faint shimmer of some vast mechanism breathing light into the cavern. The structure felt half machine, half temple, as though the architects had tried to build a cathedral inside a starship and stopped halfway through understanding what they were making. Ahead, a massive door of blackened adamantium parted. The chamber beyond was nothing like the others. It was small, shockingly so, barely wide enough for 20 steps in any direction. Its walls were encased in gold-veined marble, cracked by time, etched with sigils that resembled prayer as much as circuitry. A single raised platform stood at the center, illuminated by a pale, shifting glow that painted the chamber in muted tones. Slade felt something then. Not a sound, not a presence, a pressure, subtle but unmistakably there, like a hand pressing gently against the inside of his skull. The custodians halted. The lead guardian lowered his head in a brief, reverent gesture Slade had not seen anywhere else. "This place," he said, "is spoken of only in liturgy and uncertainty. Some call it the Chamber of Echoes. Others say it is where shards of the master of mankind's will accumulate, gathering like dust upon the centuries." Slade raised an eyebrow. "You're telling me the Emperor is here?" "No," the custodian replied immediately. "The Emperor sits upon the golden throne on Terra. That is certain. But here, some claim faint remnants of his psychic manifestation exist. Echoes of thoughts too vast to vanish. Shadows of intent, nothing more than rumor. Rumor, that word hung in the air like a warning not to assume anything. Slade stepped onto the platform, the glow intensified. For a moment his breath caught, not because of pain, not because of fear, because the world shifted. The chamber blurred at the edges as if reality itself were breathing in and out. The marble walls flickered, replaced by fleeting visions. Endless battlefields, burning manufactorums, fleets drifting across voids lit by warp storms. A million souls praying beneath shattered skies. Slade blinked once. The images vanished, leaving only the faint glow pulsing around him. He exhaled slowly, grounding himself. "What is this supposed to do?" Slade asked, voice steady. The Custodian's reply was quiet. "It asks a question." Slade frowned. "What question?" "You will know," the Custodian said, "if you can withstand the asking." The platform vibrated. A wave of pressure rolled through his mind, not violent, not invasive, but immense, like being caught beneath the undertow of a vast ocean. Slade clenched his jaw as the sensation deepened. Memories flickered at the edges of his thoughts. Missions gone wrong. Battles survived by chance or design. Faces, some he'd killed, some he'd failed to save, surfaced like ghosts. The pressure intensified. Slade staggered, his breath hitched. Vision wavered. The room seemed to pulse with each heartbeat. Then came something like a whisper, but not in words. More a concept, a shape, a question built from silence itself. "Why do you fight?" Slade's eye narrowed. The question was not a voice. It wasn't telepathy in the way he understood it. It was an absence waiting to be filled. A hollow in the mind demanding substance. A mirror held up to every instinct he had ever honed. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The pressure deepened, probing. Not memories, not emotions, but purpose. Images surged. Slade saw himself on battlefields across worlds he recognized and worlds he didn't. He saw the faces of enemies, the rhythm of conflict, the cold precision of survival. He saw himself as he truly was, not a hero, not a villain, not a soldier of justice or vengeance, a weapon, forged, sharpened, unbroken. The chamber seemed to acknowledge this truth. The glow softened, shifting from harsh gold to muted embers. The pressure eased. The question faded, replaced by something else. Recognition, not approval, not denial. Recognition. As if something vast and incomprehensible had examined the sum of what Slade was and simply acknowledged the reality. He had become a blade without a master, a weapon that existed by its own will, and in a universe that devoured weakness, such a weapon was interesting. The glow dimmed entirely. The platform fell still. Slade felt his breath steady as the exhaustion left his body. Not healed, just released. As if the chamber had taken something from him. Or perhaps measured something. The Custodians straightened. One spoke. "You did not break. Most do." Slade rolled his shoulders. "You should test harder." A faint, almost imperceptible breath of amusement passed through the Custodian ranks. Not laughter, but something smaller, quieter. Born from respect between warriors who recognized tenacity in another being. The Tribune entered the chamber then, his presence reordering the air. "The Emperor's echoes have weighed him," he said, "and he remains." Slade cocked his head. "And what does that mean?" The Tribune stepped closer, halberd lowered in ceremonial acknowledgement. "It means you are no longer considered a threat." Slade took in the room, the Custodians, the lingering traces of psychic residue in the air. "Then what am I?" The Tribune paused. When he answered, his voice was like stone dragged across a centuries-old vow. "A weapon without allegiance," he said, "but a weapon the Imperium may find useful." Slade's eye narrowed. "Useful how?" "That," the Tribune said, turning away, "depends on whether you choose to serve on them or simply survive." Slade considered the paths before him. Both were dangerous, both uncertain, but one truth remained unshakable in every universe he'd ever walked. Survival is the first mission, and war is the second. In the Imperium of man, those two were the same.